Welcome everyone for joining Nat and I in conversation with two of the leading candidates for the Office of Comptroller Brian Benjamin, who is here with us now, followed by Michelle Caruso Cabrera. I'm Paul Lewis, president of the Architectural League, principal at LTL Architects, and a professor at the School of Architecture at Princeton. Very quickly, for the candidates' benefit, I want to note the Architecture League's mission, really what we're here, is to stimulate thinking, debate, and action on critical design and building issues of our time. And not surprisingly, it's highly likely that the city will be facing significant financial challenges in the near term. And we feel it's critical that we play an active role in facilitating dialogues between the design community and candidates. The city comptroller does and will play a crucial role in the city's financial situations. And given that both the mayor and the comptroller will be new to their respective offices, there's a real possibility that one of the candidates you'll hear today will be a leading figure in the success and hopefully not the failure of the city's recovery in the coming years. Just to set the context for today's discussion, and I'll do this very briefly, the city's comptroller primary roles are audits the city's finances and performance, auditing every aspect of city's agency at least once every 4 years. Comptroller serves as the fiduciary of the city's public pension funds, about $250 billion, and provides comprehensive city budget and financial and an assessment of the fiscal condition. So whether it's obvious or not, the controller's work is likely to influence almost every conversation around the city's recovery over the next few years. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first candidate, who has been very gracious to share this time this morning with us. Welcome, Brian Benjamin. It's an honor to have you here. It's a pleasure to have you here early this morning. Very quickly, Senator Benjamin was elected to the state Senate in 2017 to represent District 30, which encompasses Harlem and the Upper West Side, and serves as the chair of the Budget and Reviews Committee. Prior to this, he has been the chair of Community Board 10, an investment banker for Morgan Stanley, and a partner with Genesis Companies, an affordable housing development firm in Harlem. He is also a trustee at Brown University and on the investment committee that manages their endowment. So certainly comes with really unique and very specifically appropriate experience. So welcome, Brian. And I'm going to ask you a very softball question, which is, what is your vision for the city? And what is the position? And how does the position of the comptroller enable you to strive for that vision of our shared city?
Sure. Thank you so much to the Architectural League for having me here this morning. I want to thank you all for listening to my thoughts on the future of New York City. The comptroller, in my view, is the chief accountability officer of the city. This is the role where we should all be able to go to find out how is the city doing as it relates to success vis-a-vis the investment of our resources, and that there's multiple pieces to that. As you mentioned, the comptroller is the fiduciary of the 5 pension funds totaling over $250 billion. We last year didn't do a great job with our returns on the pension funds. The pension funds returned 4.4% last year. The city actuary requires a 7% return. That means that the city's budget share that is going towards pension contributions has to increase. Last year was $10 billion. It's going up this year. And, as you're looking at budget gaps that are continuing year over year, about 10 to 15 billion over the next couple of years in New York City, we want that share going down, not going up. The comptroller is also responsible, as you mentioned, for ordering the city's performance and assessing the fiscal conditions of the city. I'm the chair of the State Budget and Revenue Committee, and I'm very aware of the fact that we have nearly $16 billion coming from the federal government into New York City for a range of services, particularly education, vis-a-vis the American Rescue Plan and the COVID funding. that money has to go towards sort of specific COVID recovery. And unfortunately, right now, the mayor is planning to spend at least 25% of that. Well, the mayor and the city council, I guess we'll figure out who's where, 25% of that on recurring expenses. And so if you have that scenario going on with $4 to $5 billion is going to recurring expenses, that means we have a problem in the next fiscal year, because we have not only a budget gap in the next fiscal year, but we also now have this extra $4 billion we have to cover for. And if the federal government is not going to continue to give us rescue relief, COVID relief, we have a real problem. And so, to me, I believe that the city of New York needs to have a comptroller, chief fiscal officer, who is going to tell the truth and be very clear as it relates to all city spending and making sure that we're getting deliverables and outcomes from every dollar that is spent. I represent Harlem, East Harlem, and the Upper West Side, and I can tell you, particularly as it relates to education, we're going to spend this year around $25+ billion, and I want to make sure that money is going towards helping to make sure that the most marginalized members of our communities are getting the results they need. So that's a big important role of the comptroller. I take that very seriously. I actually am the only candidate in this race who has investment management experience as it relates to the pension funds of $250 billion, where the comptroller is the chief investment officer of that. So I have the skills that is needed to help make sure that not only do we provide the returns to our retirees, reduce the city's obligation to the pension contributions, but also to invest some of those assets in things like building more affordable housing, converting some of our hotels into permanent housing or permanent supportive housing, depending upon the situation, through different ventures that I believe are possible through RFPs we can do. I think we can be very bold in this city as the next comptroller. We need it. And many people will tell you after the 70s, when Elizabeth Holtzman was comptroller, they invested a lot of money in building affordable housing and home ownership. We need to do some of that work again. I think it helps to stimulate the economy. It helps to put people back to work. And, as we really look at coming out of this COVID sort of crisis that we've been in for well over a year, we need to bring tourism back. We need to get people moving in the economy again. The comptroller can play a very important role in keeping track of how we're progressing on that, and what are some of the key things that the mayor and the city can do. Lastly, let me just say, one of the comptroller's important jobs is to hold the mayor and the city council accountable for their actions and their spending. It's something that I believe we need to focus more on going forward, particularly if you have a mayor who doesn't focus on that. And that's what I look to do.
Thank you. I want to build upon your background with affordable housing,
Sure.
And it's occupied you also in the Senate and with your past roles. Can you speak a little bit about the complexity of this issue? What do you think are the biggest hurdles? Again, from the comptroller's perspective, how can you have agency, and what is the way in which you're going to engage affordable housing through the lens of the comptroller?
Very good question. First of all, let me start off by saying that the days of the comptroller fighting the mayor and the mayor fighting the governor and everyone fighting each other, we really don't have the time for that going forward. I mean, we absolutely need to be working together. So when I talk about sort of us having a much more aggressive role in terms of the building of affordable housing, there has to be a collaboration here. So I used to be chair of the land use committee of my community board. I built affordable housing. I'm chair of the Senate, but I see housing from a range of perspectives, and I strongly believe some of the biggest issues that we have to do, number one, with the fact that there's no strategic plan for the building of the amount of affordable housing to satisfy the demand in the marketplace. Right? There's about 600,000, at least per the mayor's numbers, 600,000 units of affordable housing that's needed. in order, and at different income levels, right? That we need to build and or convert. I'm not opposed to the idea that of converting existing spaces into affordable housing. I lean on the hotels piece a lot because A, they're suffering right now, and B, it's a faster argument. But I believe that the comptroller can really play an important role in terms of keeping track of where we are and in terms of meeting that need and demand. The comptroller has a $70 million budget, over 700 staff members. We can do the data and analysis to say, here's the needs, and this is what the city is doing and how it's helping to meet that need. When a mayor comes out and says, who knows what the next mayor is going to say, but when a mayor comes out and say, we're going to build 200,000 units of affordable housing, actually, the mayor, this one's case, 300,000, and 60% is going to be preservation and 40% is going to be new construction. That means that you're only really building 100,000+ of new construction, because rehabbing existing buildings, which I used to do when I was in the development space, that's not new affordable housing. That's ensuring that those who have affordable housing, they can live in quality spaces. We have new production needs, and if we're not sort of really building towards that new production need, then we're going to continue to be in this crisis external for a long time. So I believe the comptroller can play a role through the bully pulpit, through analysis, to really kind of highlight how are we doing on meeting the needs of the marketplace, and then sort of assess within that how the programs and responsibilities of the mayor's various agencies, whether HPD, et cetera, how they're doing in terms of helping to get that to that place. How are we doing in terms of, we're having a lot of, we're going to be reviewing 421A in the Senate. There's a lot of conversation around that. How is that adequately assessed, right? And I think, I unfortunately feel like too many of our conversations get very political very quickly, and it becomes about sort of what you believe from an ideological standpoint, as opposed to where we are and what is happening, right? So if we have certain needs, are we getting there? How's that functioning? So that's something I think the comptroller can do, is really add some information to the conversation around the affordable housing crisis, and be a place where people can track how we're doing and where we're going.
I want to tie the question of housing also to what you've put forward, this kind of really interesting idea of a green land bank. And can you talk a little bit about the kind of balance between land that you could imagine being almost kind of cultivated versus land that gets built on, and how do you balance both, and how do those mesh together?
Listen, Paul, that is like the question. When I was chair of land use for Community Board 10, I never saw vacant land that should not turn into affordable housing. I mean, I was just a one-track mind. That's what we need to do. That's where the crisis is. But as I've become a senator and I've seen more, and really kind of been able to be in the public space, you recognize that there are some other concerns here. Harlem is 4 to 5 degrees hotter than Park Slope and other parts of the city. Harlem needs more green space, and there are other neighborhoods that need that as well. And so one of the things I'm looking to do, and this is actually very similar to the question about affordable housing writ large, is to really take a look at all the vacant lots across the city and look at the neighborhood that they're in, and really sort of be able to provide to the city council and the mayor's office a sense of, and community boards, here's where the vacant lots are. Here are some of the neighborhoods that really need green space. Let's, and let's kind of put some sensibilities around how you can prioritize these different spaces. As you know, right now, it's very local how decisions get made as it relates to whether whether a vacant lot becomes a community garden, or the fight between turning community gardens into affordable housing has been ravaging. I think with some data and some analysis around, what the environment landscape is, I think it makes it easier for us to have some of these conversations, particularly in communities where environmental sustainability is not something that people really grow up with. Like I didn't really start thinking about environmental sustainability until I became a senator, and that was 4 years ago, and I'm 44. So I think these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have in urban communities, and people like myself can play a real role in that because it needs to be part of the conversation. And that is, in my view, one of the important roles the comptroller can do. Most city council staff, including myself as a senator, we don't have that much staff, right? And then by the time we deal with, some issues in the community, like COVID hit, half of my staff had to go towards Department of Labor issues. The amount of incoming calls of people trying to deal with, I lost my job, I need to get assistance. That took up half my staff, right? And then you still have to deal with other issues going on. Domestic violence ramped up during COVID. You're getting those calls. And so you just don't have the staff to do some of the hard analytical analysis and data work. That's where our comptroller's office can be very helpful to these local offices who people have great dreams and want to do right, but sometimes need some of the core data to help inform their decision making. And that's where I think the comptroller can play a very important role, data-driven analysis to help people make smart decisions, taking into account the politics and the noise of the universe, but having some of the information to say, okay, you know what, all right, let's figure out what's the best decision to make.
That's really really well said. So I'm curious about how what anxieties you have about leading 800 people or 700, 800 people. Like what challenges does that present to you, and how do you see your role in kind of getting these people to move in a collective direction?
Yeah, one of the unfortunate things about going to Harvard Business School, you believe you could do anything, but I do think my main problem as someone who comes from the private sector into the public sector is I believe that we make a lot of decisions in a bureaucratic kind of mindset as opposed to a solving the problem kind of mindset. And so, you find situations where you call agencies and they're focused on their thing, their deliverable, but it's not part of a broader conversation. And one of the things I will look to do when getting to the control, because there's multiple bureaus, is really making sure that we have some continuity of problem solving as opposed to, well, this is the investment management office, we do this here, this is where we do this, the labor department, we do this, and there's not connective tissue. I have experience, by the way, as some of you've been on development projects. These are massive undertakings, right? So there are a couple of projects that I've done when I was an affordable housing developer where the amount of people involved was well over 800 when you include the entire scope of the project. And I was the lead developer in putting some of these projects together. I do think we need to have some key vision, which I do have in terms of some of the key priorities I want to focus on: equity and fairness, and I really want to make sure that we get public safety in order, economic development in order, and housing education issues. So because of my priorities, I really want to make sure that the office functions in that way. And I know that part of my job is to really lean in to make sure that we are getting deliverables and keeping everyone focused, not on just what their task is, but on the broader vision. And on development projects, as many of you know, you have to do that, right? The architect says this, the contractor says something else, all right? But one of the things that I found very helpful when I was doing development projects that we used to have every day, well, on some of my projects, leadership meetings where the key actors in the different trades, for lack of better terms, we sort of dealt with issues and managed projects accordingly. And I think you have to do that in the public sector as well.
Hmm. So I want to pivot a little bit to the jails.
Okay.
And
happy to do that.
Yeah. So and I know that you've been a strong one, key platform, part of your platform is police reform. And in specific, kind of drawing from a question from Elizabeth Glazer. The question is, one of the city's biggest criminal justice reform and social infrastructure projects is closing Rikers and building of the 4 facilities in the city, right? At a cost of about 8.3 million, completion date of 2027. 2027. The DDC is the lead on accomplishing the procurement of architects and builders. If you support the closing of Rikers, is there another structure, EDC, to take the lead, for example, that you think would lead to kind of better design, better sited facilities, and maybe lower price tag? And I guess stepping back a little bit from that, could you talk a little bit about where you stand relative to the borough-based jails and particular take on and how you see that unfolding?
Sure. So let me try to unpack that, and if I miss something, just come back to me,
Sure.
Because there's a number of pieces to that. First, I am a believer in closing Rikers and the borough-based jail approach. I fundamentally believe that we should have, particularly in the cases of jails, which are really, jails are not prisons. Some people kind of think that jails and prisons are the same thing. They're very different. Jails are supposed to be for more shorter sentences and for situations where people are waiting for the day in court, which needs to be shorter, but let's not even talk about that part for now. So I believe because of that, we should have facilities that are closer to where people live. I know that gets right into NIMBYism, and people get very concerned about don't put it here, don't put it here. But I do believe fundamentally that's the case, number one. Number two, I think that it's cheaper. The amount of time it takes for people to get to see loved ones with Rikers is just not reasonable. We should have people closer to the courts where their cases are adjudicated. Now, the second thing is I also think that we should really look at jails as a place where you can facilitate rehabilitation. I think we should have a different approach, and all of that is in the cards for how we're looking at it. So philosophically, that's where I am now. In regards to the best management of the process, and I know, and I'm with all due respect to the question, I do believe that there is a real significant issue around mayoral leadership on this. I think that there needs to be a very, this gets to the bureaucratic point. I think that there needs to be someone from the mayor's office who's central to the nerve of the decision, who is ultimately leading, and that you have DDC and the key agencies that are responsible for execution under that. I don't think that you should have an agency that is not driving there's a lot of important decisions that have to get made that agencies just generally are bureaucratic creatures that are not set up to make. And so I think that that's the important piece. And I dare say, given the scale and just, sort of the importance of this, that the mayor themselves should be closely involved in the process here. And so to me, that's really we could get into the weeds of the piece, but I think that there needs to be someone, and whether that's the economic development czar for the mayor. I don't know who every office is different. I don't know who the next mayor will be, but there's got to be someone who people believe is speaking for the mayor, who is driving this process, making decisions, involved in the day-to-day conversations of how we're moving forward, dealing with the politics, dealing with the mechanics. And I think that is how we get there. I have I don't have a lot of high hopes where we are right now, because we have to, to me, we have to see who the next mayor is going to be and what their priorities are, because we're not moving as quickly as I'd like. So anyway, that to me is what I would say. Not to get, I'm not trying to avoid the question. I just think that numerous agencies should be involved, but the mayor's office has to have someone who really understands logistics, operations, and is fully representing the mayor's view on making this a priority and getting it done.
Do you think that that's an existing kind of position, and it's just finding the right person, or is there a need for a kind of new, deputy mayor, infrastructure or something along those lines?
We make up all these titles. I think it's the right I think it's the right person, right? I think it's someone who understands buildings and the process and can, and can get things done. But it has to be someone who can speak for the mayor and get agents and get these different agencies to move. DDC can't tell EDC what to do. It's just, you need to have someone close to the mayor who's really driving the process, in my humble view. I don't think it's a new title. I mean, I think it's about the assignment and the authority from the mayor.
Yeah, and just related to the question of the DDC, you've talked about kind of auditing the waste in city agencies. Are there particular aspects of the DDC that you would want to audit?
One of the things that I am very concerned about is, the time it takes for projects to get built, the extensions and the change orders as we're looking to build different schools and projects, et cetera. I would definitely want to get a sense of, how that's coming along. I'm concerned in some cases that, that people make bids and their bids are low bids to win the project. And then you deal with the nightmare of them sort of not getting projects done on time or not having the right resources involved. I think we should be taking a real look at the track records of some of our contractors and how are we doing in terms of the time that people said it would take to do a project and the cost, and where are we, and really trying to help move that process along. To me, that's a really big issue. When you start getting to big numbers, people's eyes glaze over, right? That's where the comptroller has to dig in and really sort of distill sort of what's going on in very easy to comprehend ways for regular people in terms of how we're doing when it comes to some of our capital budget projects.
Paul, can I jump in for
Please.
a second on that? 'Cause I had a different question, but I'll follow up on what you just said. I think it's a really good point. The comptroller is, as I've often seen, is often a look back position, or that's how a lot of people have used it. So how do you, to that exact point, how do you go beyond the bully pulpit of we did bad, we could do better, to let me show you how to do better?
That is look, that's the question, right? I think that the one is first of all, I think the comptroller's office should not only be about we did bad. It also could be, wow, we did this really well. How can we take this and do it elsewhere, right? And I think there's real opportunity to do that kind of work. It shouldn't be about the political process of, oh wow, look at that, Thrive NYC sucks. Let's go highlight that. It could and should also be about, wow, this is something that's really going well. How can we build it out? So my view is, I think, you're right that a lot of it is about the look back, and I think looking back should help you figure out how to move forward. And I think part of what our analysis should and could be is, as we look back at some of our spending and programs and initiatives, we take lessons from that and we inform the city council, the mayor, about how we move forward. I'll give you a perfect example. This conversation about defunding the police, very political in our spaces. And when you talk to a number of city council members and you go, okay, where's the spending? What do you think we should do, not do? Eyes glaze over.
Mm.
I don't know how you have conversations about whether you should defund the police or not defund the police and not have very clear sort of metrics around, well, here's where it's going, this is what our concerns are. It shouldn't start with the answer. It should start with the problem. What's the problem? The problem is, how do we do public safety in the 21st century? How are we going to do that? And what role should law enforcement play within that? I know I'm going off your question, but it's part of the answer. What role should law enforcement play in that? And then how much does that cost, whatever that role is? And then what are some of the other things that are happening that law enforcement is kind of doing, but not really? Which, for example, dealing with mental health issues, law enforcement, they just come in. So how do we think about public safety broadly defined and then make sure that the resources are set up to do that? And this is law enforcement's role in that. And let's fund that. That's a different way to look at the issue. And I think that is something that the comptroller can help with, right? Because, by sort of using your analysis and data to kind of, lay out, here's actually what we're doing, it can make it easier to have the conversations about, well, is that what we want to be doing?
Mm.
And if that is what we're doing, okay, great. If it's not, well, where's the money and how is it being distributed? Look, I think that's a role that the comptroller can play, is, really not only just doing reports and being a report, center, but sort of taking some of the learned lessons and opining and working with the mayor and the city council on how to move forward from that perspective.
Paul, go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to bring in the kind of questions of the controller's relationship to the pension funds, and how does one invest that, and how does that start to bring certain kind of in a sense visions or policies or ambitions into the mix. How do you see the use of the pension funds being kind of deployed in a particular way that aligns with a kind of in a sense, kind of Nat's question of how do you end up kind of being able to be kind of strategic?
Yeah, so the $250 billion of pension assets is really a place where the comptroller has a lot of authority. And it's important to note that unlike the state system where the comptroller there is the sole trustee and can make decisions, in the city, the comptroller is part of 4 of the 5 pension boards. On one pension board, the comptroller is not on the board, but it's my view to get that reorganized. The comptroller should be a part of that board. There's some issues that I've been talking with the trustees about that we can resolve. But one of the things that I believe is important is, you mentioned earlier, I serve on the board of Brown University, and we have a chief investment officer who gets paid $1 a year. He did very well in the private sector, came from nothing. He felt like Brown was the key to his life, and wanted to give back, and has come and completely transformed the function of how the endowment is functioning, and how we're thinking about manager selection and asset allocation. Very powerful stuff. And the Brown has done extraordinarily well over the last 10 years, 10% year over year. For the last 10, 12% over the last 3 year over year, #1 in the Ivies, phenomenal. But one of the things that I think is important in how you think about, now that's $4 billion, that's $250 billion. So let's start with that. But but one of the things I think is important that the next comptroller should be looking at, #1, co-investments. So the fees, the comptroller, we're spending somewhere near $800 million or $1 billion in fees every year. Some of that can come down with co-investment strategies. That is just given the size of the fund. I think you can look at that, which I think will help will help because you have less costs. #2, I am just beyond convinced that on the housing space, I used to do housing. I know where the money is in housing. There should be a lot more investments in sort of affordable housing. It is uncorrelated with general market assets, and provides an important service to the community. It's a public pension fund, not a private pension fund.
Mm.
So I think there are, where you can, you should be really utilizing the fund to help deal with public issues. I can't think of bigger issues right now than affordable housing and homelessness. Okay, the homelessness and those things are tied. I strongly believe that there's opportunities to convert hotels that are right now struggling, which will not keep struggling, because as tourism comes back and people start sort of moving again, whether it takes 3 years, 2 years, 4 years, it's going to happen. Those investments can be great could be great for the retirees, but also deal with a really important public issue. So, the pension fund should do better. It's something that most comptrollers don't focus on because most comptrollers don't have the background and interest in it. And I talk to the trustees, they're like, comptrollers of years past don't come to the meetings, don't come to the investment meetings. And I don't know, given how important this is, not only to the city, but to the retirees, and where the boldness can really come out of the office. I just don't know how you're not focused on that.
Yeah, Nat, I interrupted you. I think you had a
Sorry
question.
about that.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. We only have a few minutes. I don't want to steal thunder with the last question, but maybe I'll ask you because it tries to wrap it up a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate the conversation. It's been great. I mean, I think you've mentioned all these different things, which we all have a great interest in, and many of your ideas resonated, I know, with me. When you get into office, it's that you've been in office, but it's a different office, drinking from a fire hose, cities facing many challenges. Do you have a vision? There's so many different dominoes you touched on: housing, climate change, the jails. Do you have a vision of what 1 or 2 issues, if you were to say, I only get 2, when you were a developer, you had to compromise and make certain decisions of prioritizing certain you felt would make the project a success, and it would activate maybe others and you get a win-win. Are there certain key things you see of everything we've talked about that if you get that right, it's going to be easier to activate the others? Or is it all just a big, melange of stuff you have to deal with and see how it comes?
It's a great question. I personally think 2 things. The housing piece we have to get right? I mean, the comptroller has $250 billion of pension assets. We have a massive affordable housing and homelessness issue. We should work to solve that. And I think that is something that's going to take a lot of time. And not only that, when we look at the homelessness issue, that actually ties into the tourism issue, which we have to get New York City going again. Homelessness, public safety, 2 big priorities. We have to make sure that we are really figuring out what public safety looks like in the city of New York. How do we deal with mental health issues? I think if we do those 2 things, so if we deal with the housing issue and we deal with the public safety issue, really think about what does public safety look like? What should that cost? How we figure that out? Those 2 things, I think, have transformative impact because it leads to a better quality of life. That quality of life, makes people want to come to New York City. It facilitates what I consider equity and fairness, which are very important priorities. So I would really look at those 2, for housing and public safety, as 2 of the key places. I want to cheat and say, the COVID spending coming from the federal government. I mean, there are $16 billion coming in that we really have to track. We have to be tracking where this money is going and the outcomes. And we can't have too much of that money going towards recurring expenses. We need to really be very disciplined. And I've been very actively talking to the mayor and the speaker, who I'm running against, but about how they're handling that, because we can really get ourselves in a real pickle if we're spending money that's coming in one time as if it's going to come in every year, which is not. It's a huge issue, but housing and public safety to me are 2 top priorities that the comptroller should play a role in.
Thank you.
So I have one quick question from the chat, which hopefully we can squeeze in
Sure.
here.
I'll be
Which is
quick.
really going to the question of of how funds, capital project funds, are distributed, and whether they go directly through the DDC or whether they go through other agencies. And it touches a little bit on maybe the question about the jails, but in particular, would you be interested in reviewing that process more closely, about how capital projects are distributed relative to agencies?
Yes, I would. Though I will say to you, if we do it in the state, DASNY is sort of our sort of hub for a number of sort of our capital projects and how we handle a lot of our sort of capital spending. I do think it's important to have an agency that is sort of the go-to for some of the other agencies where there's the appropriate staffing there. But with that being said, I would definitely take a review of that and make sure that we are sort of moving projects along in the right way, the right procedures are in place, the speed with which we're functioning, and the process is sound. So I would look at that generally, because I think it's important. But I'm naturally of the opinion that there should be a sort of like a lead agency where the staffing and the right people are there to manage projects.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you, Brian. This has been a real pleasure, and I want to thank you for taking the time not only to join us this morning, but to invest your energy in pursuing this position.
Thank you.
And looking, and envisioning a better city, a more equitable city. It's wonderful to have you as a candidate and to hear your ideas. So
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
To the Architectural League. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So
Bye.
thank you.